Hey everyone, and welcome back to our Bible study. Genesis chapter 48 is the topic of the day. We're almost done with Genesis, and speaking of which, I'm almost done, at least at the time of this filming, with the physical book that contains all of these outlines. So if that's available, it's going to be down in the link in the description, so check that out. If it's not there quite yet when you're seeing this, it will be shortly. Okay, Genesis chapter 48. When did the events of this chapter take place? Jacob and his family recently moved down to Egypt. That was about 1706 BC. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years until his death in 1689 BC. In terms of our characters, we have Joseph, who we've been talking about for quite a while. He's the second most powerful man in Egypt at this time. We have Jacob, his father. He's nearing the end of his life, and he has a conversation with Joseph and his sons in this chapter. You remember, Jacob was renamed Israel by God, and that's an important point moving forward into the next couple chapters and really into the rest of the New Testament. We're going to talk about Joseph's two sons who have been briefly mentioned a couple chapters ago. The first one, the oldest one, was named Manasseh, and he was the son of Joseph and a lady named Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On. So she was an Egyptian. And then Joseph's second oldest son, whose name was Ephraim, and his mother was also Asenath. In terms of our map, we kind of already mentioned where this chapter takes place. It takes place in Goshen, which was a region of Egypt. This whole chapter is basically a conversation between Joseph, Jacob, and his two sons. So the first section is kind of interesting. Verses 1 through 7, Jacob adopts Joseph's two sons as his own. Joseph was told that his father was ill, and so he took his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he went to see his father. When he arrived, Jacob told Joseph about how God had appeared to him in Canaan and had promised to do a couple things. Really the same promises that we've been talking about for a while with Abraham and Isaac. He was going to make Jacob a great nation, and he was going to give him the land of Canaan for an inheritance for his descendants. Jacob then told Joseph that he was going to adopt Manasseh and Ephraim as his own sons so that they would be recipients of God's promise. So rather than being considered Joseph's sons, they were going to be considered sons of Jacob and Rachel. Rachel was Joseph's mother who had died giving birth to him back in Canaan. Our second and final section, verses 8 through 22, Jacob blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. The Bible tells us that Jacob was very old at this point and he couldn't see very well. He called Ephraim and Manasseh to him, he kissed them, and he blessed them. And Joseph, anticipating that his father was going to give them a blessing, took his youngest son Ephraim to Jacob's left hand, and he took his oldest son Manasseh to Jacob's right hand, the right hand being the preeminent side for the firstborn. But Jacob crossed his arms, and he put his right hand on the head of Ephraim and his left hand on the head of Manasseh. Joseph, thinking that this was a mistake, probably because he knew his father couldn't see very well, tried to correct Jacob, but Jacob told him that this was exactly what he intended to do. He told him that Ephraim would be greater than his brother, even though he wasn't the firstborn. He said that Manasseh would become a people, but Ephraim would become a multitude of nations. Jacob blessed Joseph, and he told him that one day God would take his descendants back to the land of Canaan. And the final thing that's mentioned here is part of Joseph's inheritance. Jacob left Joseph a mountain slope that he had won in a battle against the Amorites. All right, so that is Genesis chapter 48. Now let's talk about our application. This one is kind of an application for interpreting the Bible going forward and understanding the Bible. As Jacob's family grows into a large nation, you'll notice that the tribe of Joseph is never mentioned, even though Joseph is one of Jacob's 12 sons. Instead, you'll read about the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. And this chapter explains that absence. Joseph's family name was carried down through his sons Ephraim and Manasseh, who were adopted by his father Jacob.